Pokemon is full of difficulty hacks, but one generation we've yet to try one for is our Generation 2 games. I managed to find an interesting difficulty hack recently by the name of Pokemon Crystal Legacy, which brings a lot of quality life improvements to these older games. We've received several buffs for stats on a lot of the weaker mons, changes to the encounters, and even the Ghost and Dark typings getting huge buffs due to Ghost now being special and Dark physical. But one of the biggest buffs these games did was to the trainers' teams, as gym leaders and rivals now actually feature teams with properly evolved Pokemon. And some trainers, like Red and Lance, even utilize legendaries on their teams. Today, I want to go through these games and try to decipher what the true best team would be for Crystal Legacy. As always, I'll be avoiding using legendaries, which I think will probably be only for the best, since I truly think besides Mewtwo, our team couldn't possibly improve from this. With all that out of the way, let's start by going over what I'd need to beat these games. So, because these games are based off Johto, the best starter to breeze through the early game is going to be Cyndaquil. Before getting into our moveset for Typhlosion though, I more so bring this up as it helps us sleuth out our other partners. If we do go with Cyndaquil, we're going to need a fighting type before Whitney, a dark or normal type before Morty, and some sort of psychic or flying type before Chuck. Outside of these three matches, by the time we get to Olivine, while there are other matchups such as Lance to consider, we shouldn't have to worry about what types of encounters we need to prioritize. Considering this means we only need to pursue 4 specific teammates. This should hopefully give us some leeway to use our last remaining spaces for generally good mons without a specific reason, such as a water, ground, or a steel type due to their general effectiveness as a strong type. With that in mind, let's finally get into Typhlosion. All 3 of your starter choices are probably going to be the weakest part of any serious team in these games, but Typhlosion offers a few key benefits compared to its counterparts. Your fire typing is going to give the most advantages towards beating the Johto gyms, especially early on while you have a fairly weak team. It's a very quick solution to matchups like Bugsy, Jasmine, and Price without needing any effort whatsoever. And in a worst case scenario, Typhlosion will be at least fast compared to other Pokemon in these first 2 gens with the base 100 speed to its name. I found myself only really needing Flamethrower in order to beat most battles, as even a neutral Flamethrower was enough to nearly take out, if not one-shot, most enemies. For other options, I used Fire Blast in case I needed a bit more of a hard-hitting option in last-ditch scenarios, as well as Quick Attack to pick off extremely weak opponents, and Smokescreen in order to at least let Typhlosion go down to make one of our other partners more effective. I know this isn't exactly the strongest moveset on paper, but there are a couple of key things with these games we need to remember. With the teams we were taking on, most of the buffs came from the fact teams were now fully evolved and had more mons, but that doesn't mean that they had to be difficult. I didn't really see the need to actually use Typhlosion in most battles to begin with. And the few that had actually managed to touch the field, I had really just needed to use its fire attacks. While I could definitely have used a move like Thunder Punch here over Quick Attack, I had another option that I could have used later on anyway for this role, so I just didn't find it necessary. Typhlosion also had a charcoal item, but honestly, I don't really think that my items really made too much of a difference, due to items being so simplified due to the fact that this is based in Gen 2. Moving towards Dark Cave, we can get our next encounter, and it is a monstrous member of this team, both due to its stats as well as its design. Tyrannitar is a Pokemon in these games that we can catch early on, and it honestly felt like I was cheating when using it on these teams. I found Larvitar to be my ace for the majority of the game, with good matchups into Falconer, Bugsy, Whitney, and Price before you even get a Tyrannitar. Once it evolves, Tyrannitar is now a terrifying dark type option in these games, and that goes a lot farther in this ROM hack. Because Dark is now a physical type, Tyrannitar is able to utilize Crunch and break basically any Pokemon that doesn't resist it. I found Tyrannitar to essentially be more broken than any Mon in these games I could have possibly utilized besides Mewtwo, which I couldn't actually even catch until beating Red anyway. And we're also just ignoring legendaries on this team anyway. Speaking of Mewtwo though, one of the most terrifying opponents in these games is Red, due to his level 93 Pikachu and his level 75 Mewtwo, both of which are monstrous. And Tyrannitar is a strong option to take on both of them. Besides Bruno and Misty, Tyrannitar is genuinely a really overpowered option in these games. And if it got a nerf down the line, I wouldn't be surprised. For a moveset, I opted to give Tyrannitar a moveset of Rock Slide, Crunch, Earthquake, and Surf. I really only needed our first three moves, so Surf is more so here for slower ground types, or if I needed to box our water type to fly between areas. I gave Tyrannitar the Bright Powder item. But this wasn't actually until before I fought Red, as I didn't even notice I had the item in my bag to begin with until this battle. Just like with Typhlosion, none of my items really made a difference in the game. But I'm sure this is one, at least if I had noticed I had it sooner, would have maybe made Tyrannitar even more overbearing for these games. If you want a little less of an overturned dark type, Murkrow gives you not only a dark type before Morty, but also a fly option for your team. And due to its buffed attack and speed in these games, it is arguably one of the stronger Pokemon you could acquire in this game. Unfortunately though, as a dark type, it has to be compared to Tyrannitar, which is just so broken in Gen 2 that it could solo most of the trainers. Once we reached Union Cave, I managed to catch an Onix. Because it shared a typing early on with Larvitar, I mostly used this early on in matches where Larvitar fainted after claiming several KOs to win against the final Pokemon. I finally was able to evolve this in Mahogany Town after driving out Team Rocket from Johto, which managed to at least give this a bit more usability into Claire and the Elite Four. But Steelix's biggest benefits come from its matchups into Kanto. While I had the ability to utilize Tyrannitar for most games, Steelix was also available for opponents like Brock, Surge, Sabrina, Blue, and the Elite Four. In theory, a Steel type is really useful in the Kanto section, but I definitely used Steelix as a backup option on this team due to how good our other teammates were. For a moveset, I gave Steelix Earthquake, Iron Tail, Rock Slide, and Crunch, and used the item Metal Coat as my held item to boost Iron Tail. I think Soft Sand technically would have been a bit safer, as I found myself using Earthquake more than any other move. But I didn't look too hard to find it, and I figured I could just buy a second Metal Coat anyway when evolving Steelix. If you're looking for a Steel type for your team, I highly recommend using Steelix, as it's a pretty low drawback option for your team. Even despite the water weakness we built up so far, the Onix actually was so valuable early on, as it saved me against our rivals Croconaw before we finally made our way to Ilex Forest to obtain Headbutt, as well as our next teammate. Now that we've finally gotten through the early stages, we can actually achieve clearing through our first required typing, by obtaining a fighting type before Whitney. While we technically have a dark type for our Morty objective, this isn't counting towards our checklist, as we won't have a Tyrannitar that early on. For the fighting type of choice, I was looking at two key options, with Machamp and Primeape. Both are accessible really easily in the early routes, and I can easily have it trained up to take on Whitney. But then I realized there's a far more dominant option that, despite lacking a fighting stab for this battle, could still breeze through Whitney. I managed to grab Headbutt in the Ilex Forest and catch a Heracross. Heracross is an absolute powerhouse, and honestly I found it was able to beat most trainers with ease. If Tyrannitar was our ace, this was surely our second best member on the team, taking on battles like Whitney, Chuck, Jasmine, Price, and many other later battles in the Elite Four and Kanto. Heracross has a great typing in these games, and due to the psychic type we're choosing later on, having an actual fighting resistance on this team was truly invaluable. I managed to give Heracross a moveset of Cross Chop, Cut, Pin Missile, and Horn Attack. I really only ever used Cross Chop and Pin Missile here, and this caused me to accidentally delete Mega Horn when reteaching it Cut over Horn Attack to cut the trees through Kanto. And honestly, I just never felt the need to go back and correct this. Pin Missile was strong enough, especially with our item, the Silver Powder. This was the only item where I can truly say it had an impact on our journey, and I got a lot of use out of using this with Heracross. Silver Powder made Pin Missile into a terrifying option, or even 2 hits was able to deal massive damage to enemies, and usually 3 or 4 was a guaranteed KO. I think even if I had Mega Horn, I would have rarely used it, as unlike with the moves such as Cross Chop, where there isn't a really worthwhile fighting alternative, I'd rather hit Pin Missile 2 times than miss Mega Horn entirely, since at least then I can get some damage off the setup for another teammate. For our 5th teammate, I managed to check off both of our final 2 teammates, being our Psychic and Normal type Pokemon, Girafarig. Girafarig was genuinely astounding with how powerful it managed to be in Generation 2. I know Psychic types are powerful in early gens, but seeing Girafarig be so difficult to KO was really surprising. I caught this on Route 43, which I was able to access before even taking on Morty thankfully due to Johto's open map, and this allowed me a pretty simple method of destroying his team. While I mostly got Girafarig solely for Morty and Chuck, ready to rarely use it after these battles, I actually saw myself using it as much as Tyrannitar and Heracross, and these 3 made up the core of our team. If I had at least 2 of these ready at any time, I knew I could breeze through pretty much any battle in these games due to their strong stats and strong coverage. For a moveset, I managed to give Girafarig a moveset of Psychic, Baton Pass, Shadow Ball, and Return. I had Baton Pass in case I needed the slow pivot, but I mostly just needed Psychic and Return for stabs, and Shadow Ball to handle opposing Psychic types. I did not give Girafarig an item, because most of my items I gave to Pokemon before combating Red, and I didn't have anything in my bag that would have been usable on Girafarig that wasn't already taken. Regardless though, I highly recommend Girafarig if you're trying to find an alternative to options like Alakazam, Starmie, or Exeggutor for these games, as it is one powerful option that I feel is pretty overlooked due to the other strong options Johto has for Psychics. For our final Pokemon, I grabbed something I felt could round our weaknesses out, while also giving us a Surf Pokemon, being Lanturn. I waited all the way until Olivine the catch one with the Super Rod we'd obtained there, because I felt its secondary typing of Electric would offer more unique coverage for us than Slowbro or Starmie Psychic typing. This gave us a strong option for water types if need be, but similar to Typhlosion in Steelix, this was more of a backup for us. When it came to options like Gyarados though, which was pretty common later on in our game, I actually was really heavily relying on Lanturn, and I genuinely believe for this Pokemon alone, it was invaluable. I gave Lanturn a moveset of Surf, Thunderbolt, Thunder Wave, and Toxic. But honestly, I mostly used Thunderbolt with this. I gave Lanturn the Mystic Water later on in my journey to hopefully justify using Surf more often. But I rarely needed Lanturn to actually utilize its water stabs because of how powerful our other partners were. If I was fighting a fire type, I'd usually use Tyrannitar. And for ground and rock types, I had Heracross, which put up a strong matchup. So this was more here to travel across the map than be a real stab for us. Regardless, I appreciate Lanturn rounding out the team, as it certainly had its moments that it really saved me, especially against Lance and Claire. With this particular team, I think I was able to really breeze through this ROM hack. While Crystal Legacy was objectively a far more difficult version of Crystal, I think it provided enough improvements to both the axis of Pokemon as well as Tyrannitar that I don't think I really felt the true peaks of how difficult these games could have been. These games are really difficult conceptually without Tyrannitar for what it's worth, but this team can still work without it. I mentioned it briefly earlier, but I probably would have opted for Murkrow and Alakazam as a duo to replace Tyrannitar and Girafarig. But Alakazam probably is also still really obnoxious in this generation anyway, so we could have still used it to overwhelm the majority of battles. I think I made the right choice with Tyrannitar and Girafarig though. But I'm curious if you guys have any other ideas to improve this team yourselves. I'd love to hear your guys' teams you use for this game in the comments section below. And while you're on your way down there, consider leaving a like and subscribing, as I'll be uploading more videos like this in the near future for other ROM hacks.